You can, or I can go on. I just didn't realize how quick this would be because I just did it on the planes. But I've got 8 sessions, so I can.
So you need to get
That's
into
any
tonight.
questions they want to ask?
Yeah, or I could go into the second one and just go through that quickly. I don't want to overload people, but
We sort of need to leave close to 8, so it's 5 minutes to 8, so just give questions and answers.
okay, then we can do that. Normally I teach an hour, but I see, boy, I've outdone myself. It's only 35 minutes. That's great.
That's a record.
It's a record. Yeah, okay, any questions? Yes?
Could you just go over that last part that you just spoke about the relationship that we are under the church and...
Yeah. Okay, John the Baptist says, my joy is this, that I'm the friend of the bridegroom. Right? So the Old Testament saints, and we're going to get into this tomorrow then, the Old Testament saints were actually the ones that were overcomers, and we'll deal with that in Hebrews 11 tomorrow, were the friends of the bridegroom. Right? They're the friends of, yes.
In the end times, in the future of eternity, what position, therefore, does the Old Testament saints have as friends of the bridegroom? Will they not reign with Christ?
It's not clear. It's very interesting that in the Old Testament, and I don't have a total clarity of this, let me just go to her answer and I'll go with it. So basically, the Old Testament saints you could say are the friends of the bridegroom. Christ is the bridegroom. Then the overcomers in the church are the bride, and the rest of the body are the friends of the bride. Just like in the book of Esther, that you had all the virgins that were in the king's palace, they were all wanting to be, the queen, but when one was chosen, the rest were her friends. They were in the palace with her, but they weren't all the bride. Does that make sense?
And who's the bride?
The bride of Christ is the overcoming part of the church, and that's what I'm going to go into the next sessions. That's sort of, I'm laying that foundation. It talks about in Revelation 2 and 3, whoever overcomes, I will grant him to be seated with me on my throne. Whoever overcomes, I will give him a crown of life. Whoever overcomes, I will dress him in white raiment. It's not talking about salvation. It's talking about something. Whoever overcomes, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne. Right? So the challenge, or what he's offering us, is to be his bride, to be conformed to his image, and to be on his throne with him.
Speculation maybe or not. The bride of Christ, the picture of Esther, reigning on the throne with Christ for eternity, or for 1,000 years, I don't know.
For eternity.
What and who will they be reigning over?
Well, the thing is, that's a very good question. Who and what will it be reigning over? Because we know that in 1,000 years, actually I touched on the millennium too, if I have time in the next 3 sessions. I do a little bit of the millennium, but the thing is, our problem many times is our concept of eternity is skewed. And this is how, I've been a Christian like 34 years now. I used to think that when we die, we go to heaven, and we're basically disembodied spirits. Right? Kind of like floating around. And I go, hi Art, and once in a while I just float by. But that is so totally unscriptural. In fact, many Christians don't look forward to heaven. You know why? Because it's such a wonderful place. Isn't it great? You can sit down with friends, and you can have a meal, or you can go for a walk, you can enjoy the sunshine, you can go for a swim, you can have a shower. I mean, there's something, because God made us to be human, it's spirit, soul, and body. And so we think of heaven as a place that is spiritual, that has no material existence. But when Christ was resurrected, what he said was, touch me. And then he did something else. He said, bring me some food now. And he ate some fish. Why did he do that? Not because he was hungry, but he said, I have a material existence in my resurrected body, and not only can I eat, but I enjoy it. And so what I like to say is this, that the very best things of this life are a glimpse of heaven. And the very worst things of this life is a glimpse of hell. And so what we do is we see that we're occupied by things in this world. In heaven, we're not just sitting around doing nothing. In heaven, for eternity, I'm not talking about the millennium, I'm talking about eternity. We are going to be creative. We are going to work with Christ. We're going to rule with Christ. And depending on how much we've grown in him, will be how much we can experience that intimacy and how much we can do. And so it's a kingdom. It's a kingdom of heaven. And so we don't have all the understanding of it. But we are ruling and reigning. There's something to rule and reign over. And it's a creativity going on. It's not like we're at a standstill.
We have eternity to work with, therefore, those who in this winnowing floor become the bride of Christ. What about the friends of the bridegroom and the friends of the church in eternity? Are they always to be second-class citizens, or is there a chance for them, perhaps, to get even closer, or is this it? Is this the time?
Okay, this is how I understand it. I think, first of all, there's a lot of warnings in the Bible, especially in the New Testament. And the warnings aren't about losing our salvation. The warnings are about losing a reward, missing out crowns, rewards, inheritances, all those things about maturity. Those are the warnings, over and over and over again. So the way I see it, anyways, actually, Brother Robert Ewing one time was asking, what is heaven like for those who don't overcome? And he asked the Lord, could you tell me, show me what it's like? Because when we have people who have visions or dreams of heaven, or we read about heaven, we normally read about the heavenly Jerusalem. The heavenly Jerusalem is not all of heaven. It's the capital, right? It's like saying Washington, D.C. is the United States. No, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. But it's much bigger than just the capital. But who lives in the capital? It's the king and the queen, right? The overcomers live there. People can visit, but only those that are the king and the queen, they rule there. They live there. That's their abode. And so what we see is that in eternity, that there's different places. And so after Robert prayed this, there was actually a prophetic brother in Toronto, Canada, who had a dream. And in the dream, he was walking in heaven, and there were like villages and towns and things like that in this dream, and he met people. And there were and you could see the heavenly Jerusalem was way up the front. And he met people, and he talked to someone. He says, "Oh, how did you get here?" He said, "Well, I brought up. I became a Christian when I was younger, but I kind of got away from it and really wasn't walking with the Lord. And 5 years ago, the Lord brought me home here." And he said, "Are you happy?" "Oh yeah, I'm really happy. I really enjoy being here." And he had something he was doing, and he seemed to be very content. And he asked somebody else, and they were telling him something similar. But as he was traveling along, and he was getting closer to other towns and villages or cities or whatever, there was more joy. As he was getting closer to heavenly Jerusalem, the people were more vibrant. They were enjoying God more. And then when he got into Jerusalem, it was like just unbelievable glory. And then he woke up, and the Lord spoke to him. "This dream isn't for you. It's for Robert Ewing. Phone him and tell him what you've seen." But the thing was that we see here that God loves all of us the same. Whether we're walking as overcomers or whether we're struggling, he loves us all the same. It's not a difference. The difference is in our ability to enjoy and receive that love. And so in heaven, what I believe is we're going to be, depending on how much we've grown here, will depend on how much we can experience his love. It's like I can have a 3-month-old child, and a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and a 20-year-old. I love them all the same. They're all my children. But the difference is this. I love them all the same. But the difference is when I take the 3-month-old and say, "I love you so much," all he goes, he doesn't understand. He can feel my love, but he doesn't really fully understand it, and he can't really express love back properly. But a 20-year-old, when I tell him I hug him and I love him, and I tell him how much I love him, he fully understands my love, and he's able to love me back. And the other thing is, when I take the car keys out, I can give it to the adult son, but I can't give it to the 3-year-old. Well, some people would argue about that, but anyways, you see what I mean? In other words, the maturity. So I believe that our maturity will be limited to what we are experiencing now. But the good news is he is able to bring us to perfection. He is able to bring us perfection. Sometimes you see Christians that near the end of their lives are doing well and they go through a really difficult time. And it's not because they sinned and done nothing wrong. So why is that? Why is that? Because God wants to bring that perfection. And through that, it's not punishment. It's not being reproved. It's not they've done anything wrong. It's because of Job. I did 5 weeks on the book of Job. Like 5, but that's not 5 weeks. I only preach for an hour at a time. But anyways. But and I studied the book of Job. And I read the book of Job probably 3 or 4 times a week. I read a few chapters here. And I just love the book of Job. I just love it. Because the book of Job really pictures about the process of maturity. And the first thing is, you ever heard people why they say the book of Job is they said, well, why did it happen to Job? Well, some people say, well, because Job had doubt. He said, the thing that I was afraid of happened to me. That's not what the Bible says why happened. And some said, well, God was it was a contest between God and the devil. I go, that is petty. That is not true. There's one reason that God put Job through that. You know who started the whole process? It was God, not the devil. The devil didn't come and say, I noticed your servant Job. God said, did you notice my servant Job? But there's one reason why God chose Job for that. You know why? He was a man who was perfect in his heart towards God. And you know what Job's heart was? To know God more. And God knew that he could trust him to go through the process of the revelation of taking from an Old Testament concept of God to New Testament understanding of grace. So he went through this whole process, actually the three men, this is really interesting, I thought it was interesting. Robert told me one time that those three men, who were his friends, represented will, intellect, and emotions. They're real people, but they represent will, intellect, and emotions. And for years, as I read the book of Job, which one represents which? And I remember when I prepared my first sermon. I did these 5 messages when I was in the midst of a depression. I mean, I was going through a 1-year depression. I just was seeking God. I mean, and God brought me out of it, but I lived through the book of Job. And as I was, so the first night, I remember, I prepared the message, and we were praying together, and I felt this. I was discouraged, I was depressed. I was so depressed. If the doctor wanted to put me on medication, so I'm not going on medication. But I remember the first night, and just before I was going to preach, about a half hour before we were praying, and a brother sees me as a lion, roaring out the message. I said, I appreciate the brother, and a lot of times I think, he's quite prophetic, but I thought, obviously he just, I don't know, because I didn't even know I could speak. I prepared the message. I got up there, and as soon as I opened my mouth, this power came from with me, and for an hour I was just like energized by the power of God. But just before I was going to preach that first message, like 2 minutes before the worship leader was finishing his last song, and I said to God, and I had been studying this for years, God, which one of these 3 is which? Which is will, intellect, and emotions? And I just flipped the Bible open, and my eyes fell, and I have a companion Bible. My eyes fell to a little footnote in the companion Bible. And he said, I think it was Eliphaz, he speaks from the point of view of human experience. And I go, that's the emotions. And then the other brother, Bildad, speaks from the point of view of human tradition. That's intellect. And the third one, Zophar, spoke from the point of view of human will. Human merit. That's the will. And when we're under trial, what are the 3 things? Our emotions attack us, our intellect attacks us, and our will, we're attacked because of thinking, I should do something. Why aren't you just choosing to get out of this? Choosing to get out of this depression. Choosing to get out of this problem. Choosing, those are 3 things. And then the young man, who he represents? He represents a reborn spirit. That's why he's the youngest one. Because what is our soul first, or is our reborn spirit first? It's our soul first, the natural man, and then the spiritual. And he says, I will speak in God's stead. And if you notice, what he says is repeated by God. It's repeated by God. I had a friend of mine, this has nothing to do with the message, but she was going through a terrible time, and things went wrong, one after another, it just went on and on and on. One day she got home, she was really upset. And she says, God, what did you say to Job? I don't care what Job said to his friends. I don't care what his friends said to Job. What did you say to Job? And she took that Bible. She flipped it open. And she opened right to the book of Job. And her eyes fell on a verse. And that verse jumped out at her. You want to know what the Lord said to Job? What the Lord told her? It was just really supernatural. Her eyes fell on 40, verse 8. Wilt thou also, but this is not my judgments, wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Wow. See, in the book of Job, it's interesting that after God finished speaking with Job, after God finished speaking with Job, he never told Job why it happened. See, we're going to go through trials, and we may never really know till we get to heaven. But the important thing is he had a revelation of God.
That's right.
He had a revelation of God that he's never had before. And it's interesting that when God first showed up on the scene and spoke to him, he says, I cover my mouth and I have no answer. And you know what God says? Get up and answer me like a man. And go, why would God do that? For two reasons. First of all, you know, every time we pray, God answered our prayer. In the book of Job, I was listening to it. I was on the treadmill a few days ago, and I'm listening to it with my iPad. And I heard something I never heard before. And I heard the prayer that God answered for Job, and it was in chapter 13. And you know what the prayer was? You know what his request was? He says that God would remove his hand from me, so I would not be fearful of him. And then I would question him, and I would answer him.
You wanted intimacy.
No, he wanted to know. He wanted to say that God would remove his hand, because I'm afraid of God, but if he would remove his hand, and I would question God, why is he doing this? And I would give him an answer.
Job was.
So, yes, the good Job would tell God it. When Elihu, the young man, came, Elihu says, I'm in God's stead. And you're not afraid of me, so you can listen. So he explains. Then God shows up. God shows his greatness. Job says, I cover my mouth and I can't say anything. And God says, no. Remember you wanted to answer me? So stand up now. So then God spoke to Job again. And then Job made two statements. And the two statements that he answered were the two questions that God asked one chapter before when he first came on the site. And he said, who is this that darkens counsel without knowledge? And Job said, that's me, because I spoke about things I didn't know. And then he said, now I see your greatness, that you can do all things. That everything you do is perfect. Everything you're doing is perfect. And then Job falls on his face and repents. And he's on his face, I've heard about you, but now I see you. So he's on his face now. Nothing has changed yet. But he's acknowledging the goodness of God. He's still sick. He's still lost everything. I mean, everything is still the same bleakness as before. It's not like everything's lifted. But now he's acknowledging God. God, your ways are perfect. And I don't need to have answers to say, why is this happening? I can say, you're faithful, and that's all I need to know. But he's on his face now. Now this is the key. This is the key. And the key is this. That God now turns to Job's three friends and says, I'm really upset with you. Because you've not spoken rightly about me as my servant Job has. Now Job's on his face at this point, realizing that for about 32 chapters he's been saying some really not good things about God. But instead, God says, you haven't spoken rightly about me, my servant Job has. You know what Job hears? Righteousness based on grace, not on works. Do you see that? All along, you know what the problem was? Job's three friends and Job had the same theological understanding of God. You do good and God has to do good for you. It has to be all worked out. It's a prosperity gospel, right? I like that one, actually. I'd vote for that if I had a choice. But the thing is that they had the same theological bent. That it was like, I'll do good things and I'll do what's right, and God will have to bless me. Now, it wasn't like they didn't have a self-serving point of view from God, but that's how they understood it. But God's bigger than that. He's bigger than that. He's better than that. He's more wonderful than that. His blessings are greater than that. But they limited God to instantaneous blessings based on works. So he's on his face after speaking this. But what God did is when he repented, God erased everything else he said and only commended him on the things that he said right. That's why he could say, you have not spoken rightly about me as my servant Job has. He didn't commend Job at all the negative things he said. But once he repented, it was gone. He's on his face. He has no righteousness of his own. He can't do anything right. And he hears God saying, Job is my friend. And he says, you better get right. You better talk to Job, otherwise you're in big trouble. Like big trouble. That's how you restore friendships. God's way. And so the thing is, but you know the most interesting thing about the book of Job? A lot of most interesting things. I spent so many weeks teaching and studying it. There's something about the book of Job is First of all, the problem with the book of Job that they were struggling with is they're asking the wrong question. The question was, they were asking was why? The question that God wanted them to answer was, who is God? Why is this? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? It's sort of like I go to Bud, and he says, Bud, are you still beating your wife? Well, it's the wrong question. It's a loaded question. He says, well, no, that means he used to. And he says, yes, it means he's still doing it. In other words, the question is a loaded question. And if we ask the wrong question, we get the wrong answer. They were asking the wrong question. The question was why, but God's saying, I want to ask the question, who am I? So when God came on the scene, when Elihu started to speak, he didn't talk about all this and all that. He talked about who God is. And then the last point is that after Job, everything was restored, it says that God doubled everything he lost. Right? He doubled it. Cattle doubled all these things. But there's one thing that God did not double that he lost. What was it?
His wife.
No, his wife he didn't lose. He was wishing. But he didn't. Hope this is not being taken. But anyways. But what was the one thing that that was not doubled? His children. Why would not God double his children? Why would not God double his children? He doubled everything else, but it says God doubled everything. He doubled how long he lived. He doubled everything else, but he didn't double his children. Why not?
Because they were God's children, not Job.
No. This is why. When we look at the story of Job, if we see it from a temporal perspective, it's not a good ending. Think about it this way. You know, you say, well, Job got double everything, but look, his kids got killed, all the servants got killed. I mean, it's good for Job, but what about the collateral damage? But the thing is this, that our perspective of eternity is wrong. We say this, oh, those poor kids are all dead and with God in heaven. See what we think? We think it's such a bad thing. Like, well, if you got to go somewhere, better go to heaven than hell. But the thing is, they were with God in heaven. I believe that Job's friends, Job's children, and Job's servants were godly people, godly men. And they were with God in heaven. So God doubled his children because he had another 7 sons and 3 daughters on earth, and he had 7 sons and 3 daughters in heaven. God doubled it. But we don't think that way. When we read the book of Job, when we read the Word of God, when we experience God, we need to see it from the heavenly perspective, and we don't. And that's why we've missed out on the book of Job. And this has nothing to do with the bride of Christ, but you know, you've asked the question, brother, so I've given you an answer. But you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's great stuff. Where in the book of Job, where is the type of Christ? You see the younger guy being the type of the redeemed man. Where's the type of Christ in the book of Job? Because there's the suffering that Christ went through that now Job. Is Job himself the type of Christ?
No, I've never thought about that. Job is a picture of the soul of a man. Job's a picture of the man, the soul of a man, as God takes a man and brings him into the full revelation of God. And Job himself says, I know my Redeemer lives. And who's the Redeemer? It's God himself. God came and he redeemed Job. He restored everything, and he put his friends back in their place, and he restored everything. So God himself coming on the scene is the Redeemer. Hallelujah. I know you're
Jesus is God. That makes sense.
Exactly. Anyway, but the book of Job is so rich. It is so rich. And what it does, it gives us insight in his suffering, and how suffering and joy interlock, and how suffering brings about something. There's a famous hockey player that is a Christian. He scored the first goal when the Russians were playing the Canadians. I forget his name, but he's born again Christian. He wasn't a Christian when he scored the goal, but he did that. It was the last few seconds of the game. It was tied between Canada and the U.S. The first Russian Canadian ice hockey tournament, whatever, pro. And 2 seconds before the thing was going off, he got the goal, and it was called the goal of the century. The goal of the century. And he became a Christian, and he's been preaching the gospel, and he's used that as a springboard. But he was diagnosed with cancer last year, but instead of, he's in his 60s, but instead of saying, oh, this is a really rough shot at serving God, he goes, there's something that's been going in my heart that is so precious. And so I've always walked with God, I've always loved the Lord, but something through this that is so precious in my walk with God through this time, that I'm starting to get to know God and love God in ways I didn't understand before.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So there's something, I'm not saying, I don't want to make everything, life's always sorrowful, always trials or anything else. But I'm saying, but if we avoid that, I taught on joy and sorrow, the relationship, last week, and I said this, if we try to flee from sorrow, we will cut short joy in our lives. Because many times Christians try to avoid sorrow, and they actually flee from the will of God. You know, because the thing is, we say, this is God's will, we walk through it. Some of those times are sweet, some of those times are sorrowful. But as we do, but if we try to cut short sorrow, we become very selfish, carnal Christians. You know, we can see that there is something that happens very precious. It's very hard. That's why we need one another when we go through. It's very hard. But at the same time, if we choose, we can draw close to God in those times of sorrow.
We forget that Haggai is watching very carefully
Absolutely.
as she's progressing. And he's not missing a trick. And we think that something accidentally has happened to us as we try to get away from that thing. But Haggai knew exactly what was going to be happening to you, bitterness, or whatever it might be in your life.
Exactly. And the thing is, and God's not expecting us to do heroic things. He's expecting us to surrender and trust Him fully, and then Christ in us will do those amazing things.
Was it Arizona or something like that?
Sorry?
I'm trying to think, guys, Mike, Arizona, something?
Oh, the pocket.
Oh, hockey player?
Yeah,
Henderson?
I want to say it was ER something.
I think it was Henderson. Dale. Something Henderson. I'm not sure now.
A number
Anyways,
of
he's
years ago, right?
what?
A number of years ago.
1970s,
Yeah.
when I was a young man. It could be. You know, I'm not a hockey player.
I'm not,
You know. Anyways, I've kind of gone off topic there. So I
Just,
just, and I guess what I've ended at an hour again. Yes, Sister.
I just wondered, when did God heal Job of his physical ailments?
After he prayed for his friends. It says after he prayed for his friends, God restored Job.
Okay.
So it's,
yeah.
so there was a situation where he responded. And that's a thing too, that when we respond to bless others, then it opens a kind of a